Welcome into AWA Unleashed, the preeminent podcast and video stream dedicated to the American Wrestling Association. My name is Chris Tubbs. Thank you so much for making it a part of your podcast, your rotation, whatever, because I know there are a lot of podcasts that are out there, but I want to thank you guys for making AWA Unleashed a part of your week, taking some time out, an hour every week, because we do enjoy it. And by we, I mean myself and Mick Karch and George Shire. Let's bring them in right now. And guys, I mean, we've got a fun one today because we've got one that I think there's a lot of confusion over the subject that we're going to talk about today, and that's AWA World Champions.
There's a lot of confusion in some minds, not ours.
So
Very well said.
What we're going to do today is we are going to lay things out, I believe, chronologically, and we're going to start and we're going to go through the entire lineage of who held these titles. So we're going to go through that, and you guys are going to switch off every other. I'm not exactly sure how we are, but we're going to do it in our normal way. Do you want to say, first of all, want to thank everybody. If you have purchased a T-shirt, if you have purchased a hoodie, definitely go ahead, like George has got right there. And George, you've actually got the name on the inside or the outside right there. Yep. That's a personalized hoodie. You can get that. Forget. Yep. Yeah. Got to put your name on it. But you can go to sodastickco.com. You can get that. You can get a T-shirt as well. And by the way, if you've ordered one, send us a picture. Just let us know. Send us your name and your hometown, and we will get you on the podcast. We will get a picture of you on the podcast. And as a matter of fact, you know what? Let's just do it right now. Our very first one, we've got a lot of loyal listeners out there, you guys, but there's one that I want to go ahead and start right now. His name is, well, I'll let you guys do that. Mick, who is our lucky first one that we're going to feature today?
That is our good friend Brandon Dack. And, you know, his nickname is Diggity Dack. And you talk about a loyal listener, loyal wrestling fan. I don't think there's anybody that pays more attention to our podcast than Brandon does. And as soon as the merchandise was available, he jumped right on that. And Brandon, we love you. You're the man.
So
I also got the email with the photo from him, and I echo everything Mick said. We need followers like Brandon. We've got many, and thank you, Brandon. We do appreciate you.
Yeah. So if you do have it, go ahead and send it to us. Send us a picture via Facebook, via Twitter, via email, and we'll get it on there. Do as well. Want to thank 7th Avenue Pizza. They've got great pizza. If you like frozen pizza, and frankly, I don't know who doesn't, but there's pizza. There's one thing about pizza, but you want good pizza. You want fresh quality ingredients. It's 7th Avenue Pizza, best frozen pizza on the market. And now putting the information right down there. And also Liftbridge Brewery as well, you guys. Liftbridge has been a supporter for a long time. They've got great beer, great swag. And check them out at the liftbridgebrewery.com. We'll put the logo right up there as well. Let me see what else we have here. I think we're good. And,
you want last week's trivia?
Oh yeah. Last week's trivia mix. Sorry. What is see? It's been a while. So what was last week's trivia?
Last week's trivia, and I'm sorry to say, ladies and gentlemen, no winner. Last week, I asked you, name any and all titles that Eddie Sharkey won in the AWA, and the answer was 0. Unfortunately, Eddie had a great career, chased Danny Hodge for the Junior Heavyweight Championship, but never did get the gold. So no winner, nobody knew. All you had to do was, say, I don't think he won anything. And you would have been right. But we'll have another trivia question a little bit later on.
Maybe nobody got it right because there were no titles. you think maybe people got that confused? They're like, oh, no titles. Well, I'm not even going to say anything.
You know, we're going to have enough trouble explaining to people the lineage of the AWA title today.
I got to load up on some beer.
All right. Well, make sure it's a lift bridge. And you know what? As a matter of fact, I won't do it. I won't.
No.
I'll go wait. So anyway, without any further ado, George, why don't you go ahead and why don't you kick it off and kind of explain what we're going to be doing? Because there are times too where people have held the title multiple times. So kind of take us through kind of what we're going to be doing.
Very good. Then, the first thing that I want to clarify one more time, Pat O'Connor was not the first AWA World Champion. And if you go to any website on the internet, up to and including Wikipedia, and it states that Pat O'Connor was the first AWA World Champion, folks, it is wrong. I don't care how they explain it, it was wrong. That leads me into, if you want to get the facts, today's program, Our Title History, is going to clarify it for you. And trust me, Mick and I, we lived it, we breathed it. I have the programs and I have all the documents to prove everything that we're going to tell you today. So the websites, throw them away. Now,
I did put it down on the scroll, so that's technically on the internet. So that's
you go.
True.
There you go.
True.
And
that is on the internet. It is true. It is the gospel according to George Shire and Mick Hart.
Well, and as Mick said when we were off the air, you can't believe everything on the internet according to Abraham Lincoln.
That's right. That is correct.
All right. So kick it off there, Georgie.
The first AWA World Champion was the owner of the
Pat
company,
O'Connor.
Vern Gagne. Vern Gagne. And the AWA was officially launched in August of 1960 after a 90-day fictitious challenge to the reigning National Wrestling Alliance champion O'Connor that the National Wrestling Alliance and Pat O'Connor did not answer to defend to Vern. And Vern then by default started his own company August 16th, 1960. And he was the first AWA, and it was Alliance in those days, folks, American Wrestling Alliance. All I'm going to say on this now is that what's going to happen as we go through our chronological history here is Vern held the title 10 times. So we're not going to go in order and name all 10 times because that would take us forever. But what we will do is say this. Vern held the title 10 times. His longest title reign was from August of 1968 to November of 1975 for a 7-year period, uninterrupted. He held the title. And as we go through the history, you'll hear his name mentioned maybe by who some of the other guys won the title from. But Vern had his longest reign at that time. And with that, I'm going to let Mick go with number 2.
I just want to mention too, we kind of teased George about his devotion to being accurate with wrestling history, but I'm telling you, the man knows his stuff. And when he and I kind of get into battles with people on the internet, going back and forth, when we've got the facts right there, that's when we got to say, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
Let's get this straight. Just we're going to put it to bed anyway. The next man to hold the AWA Championship is also the only man to ever hold the NWA and AWA Singles Championships. Now, there's been tag champs that have held singles title, blah, blah, blah. But Gene Kaniski is the man, one of the toughest professional wrestlers ever, and that is legit. Gene, who called himself, of course, Canada's greatest athlete. What a tough guy. And he and Vern Gagne had a very, very close relationship. It's funny how you remember certain things. And I'm going back to 1960 when I remember watching as a kid, Gene Kaniski hitting Vern Gagne over the head on television with a bottle of Vern's liquid vitamin, Geralac. taking a swig of it and spitting it all over Vern Gagne's prone body. And, that's the stuff that nightmares are made of. But Gene Kaniski's just a very tough guy, former football player. He wrestled as Gene Kelly at one point. He had a couple of sons that entered the wrestling business, Nick Kaniski and Kelly Kaniski, the real deal. And he had the face of a wrestler, he had the body of a wrestler, and he's legendary, Gene Kaniski.
I would point out with Gene is that this is what we're going to refer to as a coffee break champion, because this did happen in the AWA as it does in wrestling. And though Gene held the title for only a 2-week period, it was basically done. He won the title from Vern and lost it back to Vern for rematch purposes. And it was done a lot in those days. So that was Gene Kaniski. And Mickey also held the World Wrestling Alliance title in the Bruisers territory, which makes him really a champion of 3 of the major alliances. Yep. The next champion in the order here, man, I tell you what, and I know this is one of Mick's favorite wrestlers, and he's one of my favorites because I loved masked men. And I'm talking about the legendary Mr. M. You talk to any old fan our age, and boy, I'll tell you what, they remember Mr. M. And that was Dr. Big Bill Miller under the mask. And he was a great friend of Vern Gagne outside the ring. Vern put the title on him after he had been in the territory for a while with the mask. And one thing that Vern did was he wanted, when the time came for Mr. M to leave the territory, that he would unmask. And he had Vern's title when he did, and Vern unmasked him. And Bill was then working without the mask for a while until he eventually left. But a legendary champion in the AWA for 8 months in 1962. And one of the best all-around wrestlers in the business, period.
And a legit tough guy. I mean, Bill at about 6'5", 6'6", 300 pounds, great collegiate wrestler, veterinarian by trade. Yep. One of the greats. I love that mask too. That old school mask. It looks like he tore apart a football, and wrapped it around his head.
It was like leather. It was almost like a leather material.
It really was. But
he had to be hot.
Absolutely, George, and I agree. And I echo what you said about Bill Miller being one of my absolute favorites of all time. Talk about legitimacy in pro wrestling. The next guy that we're going to talk about, I'm sure a fan or two out in AWA land remembers a guy named the Crusher. And I say that, of course, very facetiously. Crusher, who came into the AWA area, he had been here, of course, in the late 1950s as Reggie Lasowski. But when he returned to the AWA, he came in as a heel, and eventually, we talked about this many times, where he had a babyface turn and stayed that way for the remainder of his career. Crusher was another of these multi-time AWA champions. And his feud with Mad Dog Vashon back in the 1960s, George, I think you'll agree with me, probably the premier blood feud for so many years in the AWA. The Crusher is legendary. I would venture to say that when you talk pro wrestling and AWA fans, aside from Vern Gagne, this is the guy that they remember, the legendary Crusher. And, a couple of his championship reigns were not as long as the others, but nonetheless, there's the man. I mean, and the man, the only man that has a statue in his honor in his hometown of Milwaukee.
And the fun thing about the Crusher is that he also, when you think about it, had those coffee break championship reigns. His first one was because he was feuding with Vern as a heel, and Vern gave him the title for rematch purposes. But then he got into that legendary feud with the Dog. And I would say that if you name one feud in the AWA that tops all the others, as great as they all were, Crusher Vashon is it. And Mick, do you remember the Crusher when he came into the ring and he had his title belt made with beer bottles on it? And then he also had Mad Dog's AWA title belt, and he tried to get into the ring and he couldn't bend over because his Milwaukee belt maker had made him this beer championship belt.
That's great. The kind of championship belt that Chris Tubbs would have absolutely loved. A beer belt. Can you imagine Tubbs walking around with that?
It wouldn't fit around my belly.
Well, it'd have to have lift beer on it.
Yeah, see, you give me a bunch of lift bridge.
There you go.
Believe me, I've had enough lift bridge that I could make several different variations of the belt.
Now we're going to want lift belts made. Oh, boy.
You're up, Georgie.
Our next one, when you talk about coffee break champions and some behind-the-scenes situations, this was one of the titles that was not officially recognized in the Minneapolis office, but it happened in Omaha. And that was Vern dropped the title to his friend, Fritz von Erich. And that happened in July of 63 in Omaha. And what they did were they were working out a deal where Vern was then going to go to Amarillo, where Fritz was working at the time and big in the funk territory, Dory Terry and Dory Sr., and Vern won the title back from him in Fritz's hometown. But it was a brief period, but yet you see there, and this is official, folks, Fritz von Erich is wearing the AWA championship that was the belt at the time worn by Vern Gagne, and it is official.
There you go. The gospel according to Shire. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, you're getting the real deal here. It's interesting, George. You mentioned the coffee break champs only recognized in one city. You always knew if a championship was going to stick, if a title change was going to stick, somehow it made its way into the Minneapolis newspaper. The AWA made sure that AP or UPI story got into the Minneapolis paper to legitimize the title change. Otherwise, it didn't happen as far as we knew.
Right.
So interesting development there. All right, next man. Talk about legendary tough guys. And again, talking about people in the AWA that are incomparable. And I'm talking about Mad Dog Vashon. Now, here's a guy. Mad Dog was probably about 5'9", I'm guessing, maybe. Probably about 220, 230 legit. Former, Olympic wrestler from Canada, not Algiers, Algeria. He was not, sniffing out garbage in the back alleys of Algiers. Came from a family of 13. And in early 1964, Mad Dog Vashon was still a preliminary guy. Even including in the Minneapolis territory, he came in and he lost the match to a man by the name of Don McClarity back in early 1964. And lo and behold, in October 1964, Mad Dog stunned the wrestling world. And I mean, it was a stunner when he defeated Vern Gagne in Vern's own hometown to win the AWA championship. Mad Dog, again, one of these guys, he's a champ, and then he's not, and then he is. Always a heel when he held the AWA Heavyweight Championship. But I want to tell you, to a man, anybody that was ever in the ring with Mad Dog Vashon, they will tell you, for his size, there was not a tougher wrestler in history.
And, I'd point out that Mad Dog officially held the AWA World title 3 times. However, if you look at the history, and this is fact, it says 5. And we're not disputing that. But the reason is that in Omaha, Nebraska, Joe Dusick had the policy of these quick title changes that Vern didn't always acknowledge in Minneapolis. But in the official title history, they do. So Mad Dog held the title 5 times, but really for a 3-year period, which was very good for Vern to give it to him at that time period. As I bring that up, we're going to talk about the next guy. And these are a couple of these coffee break Omaha champions. The first one was the mighty Igor. He had been feuding with the Dog in Omaha, where Mad Dog lived at the time. And Igor actually got the title for a very short week time period, again, to build a rematch. It was never mentioned in AWA Minneapolis, but he did hold the title, and it is acknowledged in the history. So Igor Vodic gets credit for a 1-week title reign, which again then brings us in. The Dog also lost the title in Omaha to a guy named Dick the Bruiser. Now, this was an interesting thing because wrestling was kind of a tit-for-tat type promotion or business. Mad Dog put the Bruiser over with Vern's blessings in Omaha for a couple-week period to build some momentum in Omaha. And a couple of years later, Bruiser paid Mad Dog back when he did the job for Mad Dog in a Chicago unification match between the AWA and the WWA title in Bruiser's territory. And they officially recognized AWA in Chicago after that and not the WWA title. So Bruiser and Mad Dog worked this out, and Vern had his blessings on it. And Bruiser, of course, gets credit for being AWA champion. This brings me to my third one in a row here. Mick and I, we've got 3 each coming up. So I'm on my third of my third.
You kind of like this guy coming up, don't you?
Oh, I said I liked mask guys. And I tell you what, this one here, my all-time favorite wrestler, absolutely don't knock the Doc, Dr. X. And here was the deal. The Doc had been here for a year. He had really literally beaten a who's who of the baby faces. And Vern had a first title match with him in March of 68. Well, back in August then of 68, in a rematch, Vern dropped the title to Dr. X for a 2-week period to build up a further rematch to keep their feud going, because now the masked man's got not only his mask, but the title. And Doc held it for 2 weeks till the end of August 1968. And then they put Doc into a program with Billy Red Lyons after losing it back, and the rest is history for the Doc for the rest of his career.
You know what's amazing about that, too? That picture that Chris put up, courtesy of the George Shire collection, is actually Dr. X.
Yes.
There were times in the AWA programs, depending on how late they were, getting to print or hit the deadline. They just, grab a masked man's picture, whether it's Bobby Graham out of Florida. Sometimes they used Jim Osborne, but this was legitimately Dr. X, Dick Beyer. And
hey, they used to use Mr. M in the programs for Dr. X. They'd have Dr. X coming off the top rope, and it'd be the M mask and an M on his boots. That picture that I shared with Tubbs was actually the first mask that Dr. X wore. You notice it didn't have an X on it. He just had a black mask for about the first year.
Well, see, that's where they got all screwed up. Once you put that letter on a mask, you got alphabet soup, and everybody goes crazy.
Yeah, don't confuse people with literacy here, right, guys?
Well, yeah. If you offer him a coloring book and some crayons, and that's as far as you can go. That's all the people that are reading Wikipedia and coming in with somebody named O'Connor.
See, I'm taking a back seat this week, but it's like poke.
Yep, absolutely.
Poke. All right, I'm gonna hang up and listen.
I get it. Yep, poke the bear.
Okay. Bye.
The next guy that I'm going to talk about, I've heard of once or twice over the years. Talk about a favorite wrestler. I mean, it goes without saying that Nick Bockwinkel, my all-time favorite. Imagine that. But Nick came to the AWA from the Georgia territory. He had a great career early on before he came here as a wrestler in Hawaii, on the West Coast, down to Georgia, everywhere. And he held regional championships. The last title he held before he came to the AWA was the Georgia Championship. And Nick came in the fall of 1970, held the tag team title with Ray Stevens in the interim. But when Nick came to the AWA, Vern had this reign going on, and we're thinking, okay, is anybody going to take the title from Vern Gagne? And when Nick came to town, he looked like a logical contender. Like maybe this is the guy that is finally going to defeat Vern Gagne for the AWA Heavyweight Championship. Well, again, I told you that Nick came in November of 1970. 5 years later, 5 years, he defeated Vern Gagne to win the AWA Heavyweight Championship in St. Paul. And you talk about a guy who earned his stripes. He was loyal to Vern, forever loyal to a fault. He moved here from sunny Hawaii. He decided he would ski and snowmobile in the wintertime. That's how much he loved it here. And that was Nick's initial title reign. And again, George, you're well aware of this, a multi-time world champion.
Absolutely. And, he's probably my second or third all-time favorite wrestler and one of my personal, probably number one or two best wrestling friends. He was. Yeah. I want to say this about Nick. He held that title for almost 5 years, the first reign. And the thing was, when he first came to the AWA, Mick, a lot of people weren't aware that Vern had promised Nick the championship early on. And there were plans that he was going to get it around 1971 or early 72. But things changed with the Hercules Cortez passing in July of 71. But here's something that changed Vern's mind too. At that time, in all the wrestling magazines, there were stories of how Bruno Sammartino had been held the title at that point when Vern got it back for 5 years, going on 6 years, 7 years. And Vern kind of changed his attitude. He was kind of out there to see if he could beat Bruno's reign. And that was a true story. Vern was kind of in competition without telling anybody. So there's a little backstory. Next guy for you, buddy.
Oh, boy.
I don't
Thanks
know
a lot.
This one.
Thanks a lot. The next man that I'm going to talk about is probably, when you talk to wrestling fans who remember AWA wrestling in the 1980s, they're still kind of scratching their heads. And I'm talking about Otto Vance. Now, Otto was an Austrian. He came into the AWA territory in 1982. There you see Big Otto. I don't want to cast any aspersions or disparage Otto Wanz. I never got it. I just never could understand what the appeal was. But in an infamous way, Otto Wanz is in AWA history as a heavyweight champion. Back in 1982, Otto, who was a big promoter and a big shot with the Catch Wrestling Association over in Germany, he wanted a little publicity, a little rub, as they say. He was going to be going on tour over in Europe, and he actually paid the AWA office, I believe, around $50,000.
True story.
For a short championship run. He worked out a deal with Vern where they took the title belt from Nick Bockwinkel. And again, it was absolutely stunning because, first of all, the finish of the match, I believe, Otto basically laid his 400-pound carcass on top of Nick for a somewhat frivolous 3 count. But again, I don't get it. I never got the appeal. I would even say Mighty Igor, to me, would have been a more credible champion than Otto Wanz was, although the reputation overseas was tremendous. The crowd popped in St. Paul. When he won the title, I guess that's all that you can hope for. Thankfully, just a couple of months later, Nick regained the championship in Chicago. But when you talk about the controversial champions in AWA history, the man that actually bought his way to a title was Otto Wanz.
I'd add this about Otto. Mick and I were both in attendance that night.
Oh.
And we were as in awe as all the other 20,000 fans. You got to remember, this was in the heyday of the AWA in 1982, and they were drawing really well. And we were totally confused because it did come out of nowhere. In hindsight, I think it really does the AWA a favor because it brings in that international thought process that on any given night, an unknown challenger could upset a champion, and that made sense. And here's the behind-the-scenes story, folks, and this is gospel. Only Vern, Otto, and Nick were in on Nick losing that match that night. Bobby Heenan was not brought into the loop. Bobby stated that later that he was upset that he wasn't included, and when you see him protesting in the ring, that Otto had his hand raised, Bobby was legitimately going off the handle because this was not in the script. Nick knew it, and Nick Nick told me the story. He says, Bobby and I had a little bit of a dispute. Bobby was ticked that Vern didn't take him into his confidence, but Vern and Nick and Otto worked it out. And it was for only 3 months.
Did that happen a lot, guys, that you know of, or was that was the only time? I mean, why would that have been the only time that somebody would have paid to have that championship? It seems like if that's the case, then why aren't other wrestlers saying, hey, I'll give you $75,000 if I can have a championship run? I mean, why was this the only time?
It was not unusual for titles to be purchased, although it wasn't widely known. Unrelated to the AWA, the NWA title was purchased by Dory Sr. for Dory Jr. to go over Gene Kaniski when Gene wanted to drop the title. And Dory Sr. paid for him to get the belt. That was a little behind the scenes work. And I'm sure it happened at other times. But this was monumental with Otto because it truly, you'd look at him and you'd say, with all the challengers in the AWA, where did this buffoon come from?
Was there a story? Was this a match that they would call cold? Was it one that was just like out of the blue? Was there any sort of a story or a build up to this?
Otto had been here for a few months and beat a few of the baby faces and just got a title shot. And it was from the beginning. He came here, Vern and him worked out the deal. But Bobby was a little bit ticked, and I understand why. But at the end, it worked out because they told him, "Don't panic, Bobby. You're going to get it back in 2 months."
Okay. I got to tell you a little backstory, a side story here about Otto Vance, and then we'll move on. And this is a true story, ladies and gentlemen. I kid you not. My bias against Otto Vance has nothing to do with this. There was a magazine store in downtown Minneapolis by the name of Schindler's. Schindler's Books and Magazines, and I would go in every month and get the new wrestling magazines. When I would stop downtown for lunch or whatever, and I see Otto Vance in there one day, and Otto was back and he's looking at the wrestling magazines. Now, mind you, this guy at the time is the heavyweight champion of the world. Somebody did not recognize Otto Vance, and the guy was reaching for a magazine, and Otto wouldn't get out of the way. And I'm telling you, and this is a quote, I was standing right there. The guy said, "Fatty, will you please move?" He said this to the world heavyweight wrestling champion, and Otto, being the gentleman that he was, with his lederhosen or whatever else, he very kindly got out of the way. But that's the respect that Otto Vance commanded from the wrestling public. Fatty, get out of the way. It's like Shire said to me when I was in Winnipeg at the Burger King. He said exactly the same thing to me.
Yeah, but that was after you had your third Whopper and the large family size shake. There's a difference there.
Let's continue on to international champions. And the next guy that I'm going to talk about, and again, now you're in an era where Vern is trying to establish the worldwide credibility of the AWA because the Vince McMahon machine is going full throttle. And Vern a lot of times would have big matches and business relationships with the Japanese promotion. And Tommy Jumbo Ceruta was one of these guys that had established a reputation for many, many years as a great champion over in Japan. When Vern is looking for this international appeal, there's a championship match in Japan with Nick Bockwinkel and Jumbo Ceruta. And the title goes on Jumbo Ceruta. The referee is Terry Funk. So, of course, Nick is talking about, Terry Funk. I've got a history with him. He's bought off. How do you expect me to win a match in Japan against a Japanese wrestler with a Japanese referee, a Japanese crowd, a Japanese popcorn vendor? I mean, the list of excuses was so beautifully done, but nonetheless, and again, like George says many, many times, a transitional champion, Jumbo Ceruta, who passed away just recently, but he's legendary in Japan. And for a short time, again, the AWA gets that rub, that notoriety as the international promotion. Vern wanted everybody to know the AWA was the real deal in terms of a scope and territory.
And I
did Vern did Vern start to do that later in the history of the AWA, once he realized maybe there was a market for it? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, but that was really it. I mean, when you talk about Otto Wanz and Jumbo Ceruta, well, and we're going to talk about another guy who was kind of in and out, but in terms of going for that international appeal, those were the two times that Vern actually went across the sea, for the AWA notoriety.
Okay.
And the thing with Ceruta, we talked a moment ago about buying championships, though he didn't actually put up money for it. It was Giant Baba and his relationship with Vern at the time that actually pushed for Ceruta to get the rub, to be able to come in as AWA champion in Japan and have that recognition, which absolutely built up Baba's territory. And that was the reason it was done as well. So Ceruta was about a 3-month champion. And yeah, it did come out of nowhere, but at the same time, you totally understood it. And Ceruta wasn't an unknown because he had appeared in the AWA briefly at different times over the last, 3 or 4 years. He lost the title to a Canadian by the name of Rick Martel. I thought Rick Martel at that moment in time, from a pure wrestling standpoint, which is what Vern's territory always wanted to emphasize, Ricky was the best guy for that time period. And here was the deal. Vern had no problem putting the title on a babyface champion at that point in time. And I say this with all due respect to Vern, but it's the truth. Vern was no longer active as champion. He didn't have to worry about a babyface being more popular than he perceived himself to be as champion. Ricky got the chance, and he made a great champion for over a year. And then he ran into a guy that Mick is going to tell us about.
Before I do that, to your point, George, Ricky Martel, tremendous wrestler.
Yes.
He had a great reputation before he came to the AWA. I would say that in a different era, different time, Ricky Martel would have been over huge as one of the most popular AWA champions of all time. Unfortunately, you're in the Hulk Hogan era. And because of that, even with all his technical skills, Ricky Martel was kind of looked at by the national wrestling public as kind of a second-tier champion, which is really a shame because he was very, very good. The other knock I would say on Ricky Martel, because he had the French-Canadian accent, unfortunately, some of his interviews didn't go over as well as they should have with the American audience. But a great wrestler and outside the ring, just a terrific, fan-friendly guy. Ricky Martel, to me, one of the best feuds of the 1980s is with the man that he lost the title to. And I know, George, you have some thoughts on this too. Stan the Lariat Hansen comes in and feuds with Ricky Martel, and they had some incredible brawls, not only here in the Twin Cities area, but in Chicago, in New York. They took it all over the horn. They had a great setup, great program on television, setting up the feud. Hansen, the big, rough brawler, Ricky Martel, the scientific babyface, and the matches were absolutely outstanding. Hansen won the championship. If you recall, Ricky Martel conceded to a Boston Crab, and that led to a very short but very controversial reign for Stan Hansen.
And the thing about Stan Hansen that we want to point out is that he was a champion. It's not my thoughts on it. It's actually facts when we give the little backstory here. Vern was still trying to, in that heat of battle with the WWF at the time. And Hansen was he was the best choice as he didn't commit to any one territory. He was an independent all the way. And Vern was going to put the title on him for that international flavor as well, to kind of go against Vince in the East Coast circus. So what he does is he puts it on Hansen, but they got into that controversy with Hansen wanting to go over to Japan. And Vern had issues because he was losing Hansen off and on with, AWA defenses. And Hansen, to his own point, was loyal to Japan first, and that's where he was making his primary money. So I don't fault him on this, but he failed to understand that it wasn't his title, it was Vern's, and that he should do the job when the boss asked him to do it. Unfortunately, Vern pulled the rug under him quickly and said, "You're losing tonight to Nick," and it didn't work. And so Nick ended up winning the title by forfeit when that famous incident took place when Stan left the building with the belt, and then, of course, sent it back to Vern in a box after he ran over it with his pickup truck. Hello? All right. I mean, that's being good. Okay, here's your belt with a Goodyear tire through it. So Nick held the title after that. That was another one of his title reigns. But then Nick lost a very controversial decision to Curt Hennig. And if you go to YouTube, this is on there. Nick is losing the title to Curt. Controversy because Zabisco interfered with a roll of coins. And Curt supposedly knocked Nick out with them. The title by Stanley Blackburn was held up. The reason it was really held up behind the scenes, and people didn't know this at the time, is that Curt had been negotiating with the WWF, and there was thought process that he was going to go. Well, luckily, he did change his mind. So Stanley Blackburn made the right decision and said that Curt Hennig was champion. And, you know, there was no evidence again now of those coins. One of those weird things in wrestling. So Curt absolutely, again, from a technical standpoint, and then put in his heel, arrogant persona that he had right at that moment. He was starting to hone what would later become Mr. Perfect. But we had him as cool Curt Hennig. And Vern did this not only for Curt. He liked him. He worked with him. He trained him. Vern and Larry Hennig, though they had their issues, guys, Vern did it as a favor to Curt. It was a perfect champion at the right time. But we know things didn't last long, and Mick's got the next one on that.
Well, and to your point, George, about how Curt was really being groomed at that point for the Mr. Perfect character. Curt, of course, was a longtime babyface, you know, all over the country and here in the AWA area. Then he turns on Greg Gagne. And I would say that when Curt was the AWA champion back in, 1987, when he won the title, that's where he really started formulating this persona, this heel persona, the arrogance, and the rest is history. Curt Hennig, to me, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, period.
Absolutely.
Let alone in the AWA. Next guy I'm going to talk about, and George, you'll love to jump in on this one, is another one of those coffee break champions, and it's Jerry the King Lawler. Now, back in the 1980s, when all the promoters are trying to band together to take down Vince McMahon, Vern had a relationship with the USWA. And, this would include Memphis, this would include Dallas, that territory. And in order, again, to try to combat the McMahon machine and also give the AWA notoriety that they were expanding their territory, that they were the legit organization, they had Jerry Lawler come in and win the AWA World Heavyweight Championship. And you know how that turned out. Super Clash 3 in Chicago. It's Jerry and Kerry Von Erich. Very controversial decision. Looks like Kerry Von Erich is going to win the championship from Jerry the King Lawler. Unfortunately, referee Marty Miller, just before Lawler was about to be had, stops the match because Kerry Von Erich is bleeding excessively. Awards the match to Jerry Lawler. An uproar of wrestling fans when they gave Lawler the championship. And on top of it, then Lawler gets into it with Vern Gagne. He hasn't been paid for Super Clash. Lawler no-shows a couple of dates, takes the championship belt with him back to Memphis. The AWA strips Jerry Lawler of the heavyweight championship. And once again, you get into that Mickey Mouse behind-the-scenes controversy. But again, out there, lots of pictures of Jerry Lawler with the AWA World Heavyweight Championship. He gave him notoriety, he gave him fame, but it was so short-lived.
Well, and it was short-lived, although it was about 6 months. Here's the thing. That Super Clash thing, if you want to have controversy in pro wrestling, and this is one of the greatest stories, and this brings in our modern day fans too, many of them. If you talk to Jerry Jarrett, if you talk to Jerry Lawler, they claim that Vern didn't pay Lawler for that Super Clash night. If you talk to Greg, which I have dozens of times, and Vern back in the day, they both said they weren't supposed to pay Jerry. It was supposed to be Jarrett that was paying Lawler because of their working relationship, and they had it worked out that each promotion was going to handle the paydays for their individual guys. And Kerry Von Erich was in that mix as well because he was working for Fritz's promotion. So that's one of those things where the parties that are involved, I think the only two that are left are Jerry Lawler and Greg Gagne, and they still have their own version of it. We may never know the truth.
And George, just real quick, because I know we're running short on time. You know, the interesting thing about it, again, is that depending on who you're talking to, you're either going to get the story or you're not. You're going to get, it's a he said, she said situation. I've heard some people say, yeah, I didn't get paid. Some wrestlers said, I didn't get paid for Super Clash either. So is it revisionist history on their part or on Greg Gagne's part? Whatever. But, one of those blips on the radar, kind of a dark blip in AWA wrestling history.
Well, one of the things that's interesting about that, too, with the three promotions attempting to work together, they were trying to combat Vince McMahon, and they figured together they could be stronger. But the real problem, Mick, it was the fact that they had three chiefs. Jarrett wanted to be in charge, Fritz Von Erich wanted to be in charge, and, of course, Vern. And ideally, you just can't have three chiefs. You got to have one guy in charge. In the end, as Vince McMahon so appropriately said, he watched them implode.
Absolutely.
But the truth is Vince did a lot of things behind the scenes that we could go into at another time that had a lot to do with that. But that's the way it all went down, folks. Lawler was stripped of the title, and we moved on.
Now you've got a little juxtaposition here in championship reigns.
Well, I'm gonna say this: the next champion after Lawler, and I'm going to let Mick go into this after I speak, but the next champion was Larry Zbyszko. We'll stop right there. Larry was in Japan, and before 60-some thousand fans, folks, this documented, in Tokyo, Japan, Zabisco dropped the title to Masa, Mr. Saito, Mr. Torture, as he was called by Jesse. Masa Saito was the real deal, kids. I'm telling you. This was a guy honestly, if you pick a fight with him, you better have your insurance paid up and have your plot picked because he's going to put you there. And he won the title from Zabisco in Tokyo, Japan before 60+ thousand, came back to the United States. They ended up having a rematch, of course, as time went on. And as planned, Saito dropped it back to Larry Zbyszko. And Mick, you can take him away right there.
Larry Zbyszko was the last AWA champion. He had initially won the title after they stripped Lawler. Larry Zbyszko won the title in an AWA battle royal. There's old Larry, and the man that he eliminated to win that championship was the late Tom Zink. Larry won the championship, and of course, the big knock against Larry Zbyszko from wrestling fans is Vern gave Larry the title because Larry was married to Vern's daughter, which in fact he was. He was married to Kathy Gagne. Now, the question is that reason enough to give a guy a title, or is the fact that Larry Zbyszko had name recognition all over the United States, all over the world, and in the dying days of the AWA, Larry Zbyszko was a saving grace. I'm telling you, along with Wayne Bloom and Mike Enos in the tag team scene, Larry Zbyszko got such tremendous heat. Of course, he had that incident, that angle with Nick Bockwinkel on television where he hit Nick with the nunchucks. Nick turned babyface. They had a tremendous feud. Larry fought Scott Ledoux. I don't think any AWA champion in history has as much heat as Larry Zbyszko, calling the fans the spudheads and whatever he did. But the AWA, of course, closed their doors, and Larry Zbyszko goes down in history as the very last AWA champ before the key went in the lock and then was thrown away.
I would point out that when when the promotion was really on life support, seriously, Larry decided to take up some bookings with WCW, and he was granted their Western Heritage Championship or some crazy belt, but he was the Heritage Champion. And Vern just announced that Larry was stripped of the AWA title. And then shortly after, the key turned the lock for the last time.
So let me ask you this. We went through the lineage. We went through, you kind of went through and you explained kind of how it went from one person to another. One name that we haven't mentioned, and I know that people have asked, there was the overturning, maybe one of the biggest questions in the AWA. What if? And you guys know where I'm going. Why did you not mention Hulk Hogan? And some people might know, some might not, but we see that Hulk Hogan beat Nick Bockwinkel, but he didn't really beat Nick Bockwinkel. Why don't you go ahead and start out with that, Mick?
Well, first of all, we don't mention Hogan in the lineage of AWA champions because he never held the title, period. You can, look at all the YouTube clips that you want. You can go on Wikipedia. You can this, that, and the other thing. Hulk Hogan was never AWA champion. The age-old argument, would Hulk Hogan have saved the AWA? If Vern Gagne had given Hulk Hogan the championship, would Hogan have stayed here and not gone to WWF? No, ladies and gentlemen. And this is, it's conjecture. It's opinion. Vince McMahon was going to get Hulk Hogan regardless. He was going to buy him away from Vern Gagne. Hogan did not need the championship. He did not. He was just as good going after the title, the chase. And again, that you have that big controversy, the Super Sunday, etc., where Hogan supposedly beats Nick, and then they take the title away from him. He never held the championship. And in retrospect, good for Vern Gagne for sticking to his guns. It wouldn't have made any difference in the long run. It would not.
And to add to what Mick says, I mean, everything you just said, it isn't even conjecture, it's fact. But here's the deal. Hogan was not going to get the title for another reason. And again, it goes back to Vern. He was not going to have a more popular champion, but he did not need to because he was going with his tried and true outside the ring friend, Nick Bockwinkel, who along with Bobby Heenan. I mean, you talk about box office magic as champion and manager. Vern, that he had the perfect setup. Anybody that challenged those two drew a house. And that was where Hogan was getting his biggest rub, was that Nick and Bobby were putting him over and making Hulkamania the reality that it was going to become just a few months later when McMahon claimed he created it. So, folks, you go to those websites and that Hogan's name is mentioned on some of them. You believe it if you want to, but you know what? If you want the true history, we have just went down and there were officially 18 AWA World Champions. And anyone else that's listed, don't argue with us. And if you want to argue with me, fine, but I'm not going to argue with you anymore. Pat O'Connor was not AWA World Champion.
I saw a picture of you with the AWA title. Weren't you number 19 at one point?
Well, I could show the folks I actually wore Nick Bockwinkel's belt. I had it on. So I guess I was AWA champ.
There you go.
I mean, that's where the rationale comes from.
Let's go ahead and wrap it up. Bring it home, guys. Let's go ahead and give some shout outs. And then we got some trivia this week. So the shout outs, it's going to start with you, Mick. And this kind of this might feed into a future show here.
Absolutely. I want to give a shout out to one of the AWA's most lovable enhancement guys. Listens to our podcast all the time, Nacho Barrera. Love Nacho. He is such a sweetheart of a guy. And you teased it a little bit. We are going to have Nacho Barrera. He has agreed at some point down the road to be on our program. Shout out to Nacho.
And I guarantee you, when we do have him on the show, we will put him over.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Hey, I got to give a shout out to Chris and Mick too. Boy, I'll tell you what, when I look at my longtime wrestling friends, this guy and I go back to 1968, and I'm talking about Norman Keatzer. If you know Norman, I mean, oh my God, if I could tell, we could do a show on Norman, and this guy was quirky. He was funny. He was different, but in his day, one of the most knowledgeable of the business. And here's the key. In the day, if you wanted the inside stuff on pro wrestling, not like the fluff you got from the newsstand books, Norman's wrestling news publications were really the Bible. He did these area close-ups, and we had inside stuff on all the different territories. And Norman is a faithful listener, one of my best friends in the business, and he's had some health problems in the past few years. He's dealt with some serious issues, and just God bless him. He gave us wrestling back in the era through his magazines. It was great. So Norman, I love you, man, and I thank you for your friendship. And
I'm going to go with a well-known trainer out east, Johnny Rods, who follows us on Twitter as well. It's and I actually I've got it here at Rods Johnny, and I want to thank Johnny Rods for following us. And yeah, it's great to have somebody like that supporting us. So Johnny Rods, this is for you. Let's go ahead and give the trivia question, Mick, before we wrap it up.
All right, let's see if we can get a winner this week. I want to know, how many times did Vern Gagne defend the AWA Heavyweight Championship against Andre the Giant? Andre, of course, came in and out of AWA territory many, many times over the years. Won a battle royal to get a shot at Vern Gagne. That was promised to the winner. How many times in all did Vern Gagne defend against Andre the Giant?
And if you know, you can email Mick or email George. You can see their emails right there. Guys, this has been great as we wrap up the month of July. And I know we haven't even figured out what's going to happen next week, but we'll figure that out. But good show.
Thanks. Appreciate it. You know, I'll see what Nacho's doing. You know, maybe Nacho's down at the beach, you know, flashing off that incredible physique of his. Maybe we can line him up or something.
We'll figure it out.
Thank you, Chris, for the good job. Always.
You got it. And by the way, guys, subscribe, rate, review anywhere, YouTube, and do us a salad, would you? Okay. Goodbye.